Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have my book review of the book Path of Vengeance by Cavan Scott. This is one of the last books in Phase 2 of the High Republic. It is a young adult novel, and it follows mainly the characters of Mardra and Yana Rowe from the Phase 2 era. It is particularly following up the other Phase 2 YA book, Path of Deceit. Now, unfortunately, the YA hasn't always worked for me, particularly for Star Wars. I thought the Phase 1 YA books were meh or bad, unfortunately. But I thought the Path of Deceit, which kicked off all of Phase 2 and was YA, was actually quite entertaining. It wasn't as high or as good as any of the adult novels, but it was still highly entertaining. And I still feel the same way about this book. This is highly entertaining, but it still doesn't necessarily reach the height of the adult novels. But it's very important. If you're reading along and following the High Republic, this is very important. This is setting up a lot of things for the future. You have, in Path of Deceit, you introduce the Path of the Open Hand. You introduce the characters of Mardra and Yana, and particularly the mother, who's in charge of the Path of Open Hand. And then some events happen at the end of this book, which are very impactful on those characters. And then you have the big books, where the big events, the galactic scale events are happening. And you have Convergence, which talks about the Irem-Enroch War and how they try to come to peace terms. And then the Battle of Jeddah, the script, which shows how everything goes to heck when they try to make peace. And then Cataclysm shows the final showdown with the Jedi fighting against what ends up being the Path of the Open Hand. And this book is kind of adjacent to these two books, to Battle of Jeddah and to Cataclysm. However, both of these are heavily focused on the Jedi's perspective, on the Republic's perspective, which is what most of the High Republic books have done. And while Path of Deceit had Jedi in it, certainly, it actually felt like it actually focused on the Path of the Open Hands perspective, and that is 100% the case here. There are Jedi in this book, and even some Jedi POVs, but they're very small time. They're not the main focus. They are not the driving force of the book. The driving force of the book is the two main storylines of Marda and Yana. Marda, who is feeling the loss of her loved one, is become the guide of the Path of the Open Hand, and she's following along with the mother and goes on a mission to find Planet X and to find what's on Planet X. Then you have Yana, who's kind of adrift, who's also had felt the loss of a lover, and she ends up going to try to save the herald of the Path of the Open Hand and figure out what's going on. What is the mother's ulterior motive? And meanwhile, the mother is playing everyone and is trying to have her inner Palpatine, try to have all these machinations and all these plans in place. And some of them work and some of them do not. And Mardra and Yana's story kind of goes like this, where sometimes they kind of sync up and then they're separate, and then they sync up and then they're separate. So they kind of go in and out together. They're both interesting characters, but they're not characters that will stick with me. Characters that I love, characters I really feel connected to. And I think that's probably the biggest problem of Phase 2 is that it doesn't have quite the impact that Phase 1 had. Phase 1 had way too many characters and was kind of all over the place in its production design. But some of the characters stuck with me, some of the plot lines really resonated with me, and some of the themes as well. And I feel like Phase 2, they honed down the characters, which was a good decision, and they really focused the plot line. The focus here feels like a natural trilogy with these books, and then these books bookend the overall saga, focusing on the villain's perspective. So they did all that stuff correct. It's just that I just don't empathize, I don't connect personally with the characters, which is sad because that's like the main driving force of being a fan is you're connected to the characters. But that's essentially how I feel about this book. I don't really connect to any of the characters. So I don't think that this is going to be a favorite necessarily going forward, thinking about, the book in a couple of years, but it's still very entertaining and incredibly important. With Phase 1, I said, you will miss things if you don't read the YA books, but you don't really have to. I didn't recommend people necessarily read them unless they wanted to be completionists. I felt like the adult novels got the main point across, and just you might be like, oh, who's this character, a little bit. Whereas this, I feel like you cannot miss the two YA books. You need to read these. Middle grade, I think you can skip the middle grade this phase, unfortunately. But the adult books, I think, are really, they're very good. And the middle, or the young adult kind of bookend overall. Start the phase, end the phase. So they did that pretty well. As you can tell, this is a big chunker of a book. It is page count, the longest High Republic young adult novel. Might even be by page count the longest High Republic novel. But it is also, when you open up and look at the pages here and look at the pages here, this is actually a much smaller font size. So it's actually not just longer in page count, but also has more words per page, a lot more words per page. So this is actually really long comparatively to its other YA counterparts. And I don't know who could do this math, or someone could figure it out. But there is one YA book that is a little bit longer than this, and that's Lost Stars. It's just, I think, a couple dozen pages longer. But this has a smaller font size, so I'm almost certain that this would be a longer per word count than Lost Stars, which means it is the longest YA book. And it has a few touchstones of YA that you can tell, but one thing I like about Cavan Scott's writing is his writing overall still feels very much like it could have been an adult novel almost. He's just using the young adult characters. It's almost as if they with this phase, they said, we have characters, the main characters of the adult novels, and then we have the main characters of the young adult novels. But we're making them still connect well. So I did like his writing as a YA book. I still think that these two YA books are much better than the YA books of Phase 1, but that's not saying that much. Trying to think what else I could specifically say about this book without spoiling it. It's divided into 3 parts. The first part is called Battle of Jeddah, and really kind of, it starts with the end of the Battle of Jeddah and then carries on. And then the second part is, I believe, the battle for the Path. Let me check it real quick. It is, yes, the Battle for the Path, which is the quest, that basically the search for Planet X. And then you have the final part, which is the shortest part, which is the Battle of Dalna, which really kind of coincides with Cataclysm. And so it's kind of taking place during these other books, but it also ends after them. And it makes sense why this was the last released, because it kind of spoils what happens in the others. So don't read this until you've read everything else. But it's still, I think, very good, quite enjoyable. Just not necessarily top tier Star Wars, but very enjoyable. I'd give it like an 8 out of 10. Very enjoyable, great plotting, even some good themes with some of the characters. It's just that the characters just don't connect enough with me, and so that's why I can't give it much more. But one thing. I actually noticed in one part of the book, in one sequence, they're talking about breaking a character out of jail. And they're trying to figure out how to do that. And one of the characters makes the comment, well, I think you're too big to fit under my robes, to fit under my jacket, rather. And I thought that sounds so much like a callback to the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, where Obi-Wan has Leia underneath his robes. And so I thought surely that was a callback. And so I tweeted about it. And Cavan Scott actually responded to me saying, no, he actually wrote that scene before he watched Kenobi, before Kenobi came out. And so because of that, it just happened to seem like one influenced the other, but they really didn't. So I had my own post hoc ergo propter hoc moment. But that was fun that I got to interact with Cavan Scott online, that he responded to me. But overall, I enjoyed the book, but didn't love the book, but really enjoyed the book. If you've read this, what were your thoughts? What did you think of the ending? What did you think of how they resolved the at the end? What did you think of all of that? Leave your thoughts in the comments section down below. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.